Hi everyone, I guess we'll just get started here. My name is Ram Vedam. Welcome to another episode of Common Lisp Study Group. Today we'll be continuing our discussion on essentially ASDF and working our way through sort of the build tools that one would use to distribute Common Lisp libraries and distributions. Before we get started on moving from ASDF to Quicklisp, which is really the major topic of discussion here, I thought I'd bring up and sort of show off an answer to a question that was presented last week by one of our members regarding FASL files and loading of images. So if you recall, and to get things a little bit more, put things into perspective, let's just set up here. We have a project that we started with the Hello ASDF project, and I will go ahead and move the tar file that I made from last week here and show you guys a little bit of a setup here. And this project was nothing more than a set of really simple functions. If we go into our packages.list, we'll see in a minute here that this guy is nothing more than a simple package that exports another package, and it has a top-level program called Hello Program. All right. And if we look at our ASD file that we started with, you'll see that we went ahead and said that we have a dependency on Alexandria. We set up an entry point if we wanted to compile this as an executable, and we defined the order in which these modules and script files should be actually loaded. So now, one question was brought up, well, is how can we generate an image on this and actually load it up? So if you use, I noticed something, and I was doing some digging on Roswell, and maybe the version of Roswell that I'm using on my system, but once you've compiled this guy, which we'll do right now, I'm using vanilla SBCL. I'm not using Roswell for the moment. You will see that this will go ahead and go through our packages, download any of the dependencies into the image, compile the image, and once compilation is finished, it will write out a system.image file, and then it will exit out. So where is this file located? As if you remember our last broadcast, this is actually located in, and this is on all Unix-based systems. I tested this on both Mac and Linux. I'm currently running Mac OS X here. It's located in a directory called .cache in the Common Lisp directory. And it's under, if you notice here, there's different distributions. Under the Common Lisp you compiled this guy on. Now the version of SBCL I compiled this guy on is 147, which is available on Homebrew. So if we go into 147, and you'll see that it actually copies the directory structure to the exact location where our original package file is located, our original project file, hello ASDF, which is home directory Common Lisp. And this is the full absolute path, not the actual relative path. And if we go in here, we'll see hello ASDF, and that actually is the resulting directory and file structure of it. You see that hello ASDF.all-systems.image is actually available. And if we go ahead and do, as Michael Fiano mentioned last time, SBCL-core and specify -all-systems.image, it's actually loaded up, and we can actually run this guy. So we know that our top level functions in the hello RV hello namespace so we can look at the export symbols and call the export symbols as such, and it will automatically retrieve that and print out what we were expecting. Now, another question that was brought up last week that I also wanted to touch base on, and this is going to lead more into Quicklist, is that of distributing facils. It was mentioned that if you are using the Quicklist repository proper, that is the one that Zach Bean maintains, it is encouraged, and often I haven't heard anybody discouraging this, that you go and provide your source to them and make sure that it compiles on multiple Lisps. And Quicklist there is more like a source repository. What it happens is when you load up an image, it checks to see if the source registry on your system has this library. If it doesn't, it'll go and download it from Quicklisp and then compile it on your system. But let's say that you want to actually go and create a facile distribution that you want to give somebody, and they'll just go ahead and use like ASDF, or even throw it into their own, Quicklist install, untar it, and just use it as is. Well, there's another way of doing this as well. To set this up, I'm going to first blow away everything here, so you guys can actually check, see what actually gets generated. And I'm going to start again on vanilla SBCL, and what I'll do is now I will call ASDF operate deliver ASD op, all right, and the name of the package or the system definition that I'm actually trying to compile. And what happens is when you quit out of Common Lisp and look in the directory, again, it's going to be in the cache directory of the project that you're compiling. All right, it generates the following. It generates all the facils, and it generates a system definition file for you. If we look into this system definition file, this is really just a template. Okay, it defines a system that we compiled. This is the main thing that gets automatically added to the system definition file, ASDF/bundled::prebuilt system, to tell the Common Lisp that you're loading that this is what this was built on, what version number it is, and if you notice, the dependencies is actually not defined here, although we do actually have dependencies. So what I normally do is I actually go in and edit this file, or I actually create my own ASD file, which you can use if you do just a facile op, which I think is now called compiled bundled op. So this way you have a little bit more control in how the system definition is actually created. And I specify the dependencies here. And now this is ready to be distributed, actually. And one way of actually setting this up for distribution is just to go ahead and, generate a TGZ of this file, right? And now we'll just go ahead and, load it into, for pretend's sake, we'll load it into my own system here. And the way I'll do this is let's say I just downloaded this file off the internet. What I'll do is I'll move it into my ASD facile TZ to my Common Lisp repository here, and you'll see that it's available here. For the time being, I will go ahead and remove my source directory since I already compiled it earlier, and I'm going to just go ahead and extract this guy here. So this is how you would normally download the TGZ file, copy it over into your Common Lisp directory, and then just extract it. Okay. Now, once this is done, you've installed the system. A couple of you may have already noticed, and we can certainly do this by doing an ls-l here on the command line, that these look pretty small, and even though we're actually using a fairly large library in Alexandria, the reason for this is FASL files do not, at least I haven't figured this one out, and if there are other experts here who know how to do this, please chime in. But as far as I can tell, FASL files only generate, essentially like DLLs, the code and symbols related to the current package, and it doesn't incorporate symbols and packages from the dependencies. This is why you have to actually specify, if you're using third-party dependencies in the ASD file, what needs to be loaded, all right? So here specifically, you have to specify the depends on if you're doing any third-party dependencies. And the reason for this is when you load this guy, ASDF would be able to know what needs to be available in the source registry. And if you're using just ASDF alone, it would complain if the package doesn't exist. In this case, Alexandria is installed, so we don't have to really worry about that. But if it didn't, it will complain. And just to show you that it will load Alexandria first, you could do a force all on load system. And what it will do is it will recompile Alexandria if it exists, or it will compile it if it hasn't compiled it yet. And it will then load up your FASL system. And it's like what we used before. You could just go ahead and do program. And it's the same thing that we had before. Obviously, this is kind of a pain. Like if you don't know what dependencies an ASD has, you would have to go into the system definition, figure out what systems to load first, or have downloaded in your source registry prior to actually loading the actual system definition itself. So one question obviously was, and this really will bring us to the discussion on Quicklist, was, is there a better way? Do I really need to know, what a system is when I'm just loading up its library? I should be able to just go ahead and use that, have Common Lisp figure out what is not available and have it download. And that's the start, and that's sort of like the context in which Quicklist comes in and helps us in that dependency management problem. Are there questions on this? Cool.
No, I'm good. Thanks.
I hope this makes sense, because this honestly, if you want to use FASLs, you surely can do so. There are a couple of caveats there that I should also mention. One is, and I only noticed this because of some experimentation I did over the weekend on this. It will only load FASL files, at least within the context of SBCL, as long as they adhere to a particular Common Lisp distribution and Common Lisp version. This is almost one of the reasons why I discourage you to use FASL system definitions unless you are managing the repository yourself. And even there, I would argue that there are better ways of doing deployment, especially with some of the newer tools that have come out for DevOps that we could certainly leverage also in Common Lisp to make the system building more reproducible. And you can certainly use those tools here to create essentially a binary image of everything in it, so that you can just go ahead and deploy that single unit onto, say, a cloud or whatever, if you're using server apps. Or in the case of static programs, you could just use program op to get everything compiled into a single image that can then just be run. So that's one thing. The other thing about FASLs that I wasn't too thrilled about, and again, this is one of the reasons why I'm discouraging the practice of using it unless you really know what you're doing, is that unless you're using Quicklist, there is no guaranteed way that your your system will actually get loaded as you thought it would. Primarily, and this again goes back to what I was talking about with the dependencies. Again, I'm only suggesting that the easiest thing to do, so you don't get any confusion, is to just go ahead and use source compiles. And as we go on to more of the deployment story of deploying Lisp applications, I will bring up a couple of ideas that you can certainly use to actually compile your things into either static executables or even like say Docker images, and then use that to actually load them up into like a Docker registry. All right. So this brings us to what is Quicklisp. So as I mentioned earlier about ASDF, ASDF really is just a build tool, okay? And it doesn't actually deal with the situation of dependency management, particularly other than notifying you that a dependency doesn't exist. ASDF doesn't do anything. It just asks you what to do. There were additional tools that were built to actually resolve this problem and really like bring Lisp building, Lisp image building up to like the quality of say like Python or Ruby, where you're building up wheels. Quicklist really kind of became the de facto package manager because it did this dependency issue, and it fixed it and did it well compared to some of the other approaches that were actually taken. So I thought I would get started by at least showing you how to install Quicklisp. Of course, those of you who probably have read Zach's documentation, there really isn't anything really crazy and complex about this, but for first comers who aren't necessarily familiar with how to load stuff into Common Lisp, it might be a little bit daunting. So I'm going to first start by getting rid of my local install that I did earlier here for demo purposes, and I'm going to just install I'm going to install it from scratch. Now, the first thing that you need to do is obviously go to quicklisp.org, which is where Quicklisp is actually available, and download the Lisp file. You can do this all in a single thing on the command line, of course. I tend to use it and do it in 2 steps. Not the greatest thing, but it certainly does help. So when you download Quicklisp, it'll download this file that, just to show you, is nothing more than setting up. It's a script that will set up the system for you to actually go in and download dependencies from their repository, which is hosted on AWS S3. And the way you actually go ahead and leverage this, guys, is you'll do, sbcl --load quicklisp.lisp. For those of you who like to type on the command line, there's another way of also doing it, which is you can do load Quicklist, and it will look for a .lisp file in the current directory that you're running sbcl in. And I can show that to you as well, which is you can do load Quicklist. And once you get it here, it will go ahead and ask you to do Quicklist quick start :install, and it will download its directory structure, the version of ASDF that it's using, as well as some other setup, and it will install Quicklisp into your home directory. Of course, So just to show you this, Quicklist is now installed, and what it did is it creates this directory called Quicklist that has the version of ASDF it's using, some client info regarding the current version of the client that it's built or leveraging, a setup script that later on when we call ql::add to init file, that when your Lisp loads every time, the setup script can be called automatically so that your Quicklist repository is always available on the image. Additionally, it has this directory called dis. So if we go into dis here, this will hold all the distributions that you may have downloaded. Each project inside Quicklisp is called a distribution. When you first download a project from Common, like S3, like let's say we built, for the sake of example, let's go ahead and load up Alexandria. Load Alexandria. It will go ahead and download this guy and unpack it, get the system definition file, automatically load it into your current running Lisp image. But what happens behind the scenes? So if we go into the Quicklist directory, we'll see that if we look for Alexandria, we'll see that a distribution called Alexandria was created. It's installed and generated by Quicklist once it downloads it. It also keeps a copy of it and generates what's called an archive. The archive has all the Lisps that you've essentially downloaded from the Quicklist repository. It actually caches each one that you've downloaded and specifies them inside this archive directory. And then the actual source code will be available in this Quicklist software Alexandria with the the date that it actually compiled that system. Now this naming scheme that you probably see here, the particularly Alexandria date number dash get, this is the naming scheme that if I remember correctly, that Zach uses to actually go in and label each one of his projects prior to actually setting up the zip file, so that he knows when he actually grabbed the latest Git repo version and tested it. And this is how he essentially archives each particular version of the project that he's actually using. There is one thing that I want to bring up also, and this is somewhat related to ASDF, and I wanted to ask some of the senior Lispers that are on here. So in Quicklisp, okay, Quicklisp, you specify from the system definition a particular set of dependencies, and there's this thing in ASDF that allows you to specify a particular version of a library that you're using. All right, and I can give you an example of this. If you go into Common Lisp, go into hello asdf.asd. In here, instead of Alexandria, I can also do version Alexandria. This is a new feature that's in at least 3.1 and later. So anybody who's using ASDF 2, which I don't encourage you to use ASDF 2, but if you're using ASDF 2, try to upgrade to ASDF 3. You can specify a version here, like 1.2.1, and what happens is when you load the system up, it checks to see if that specific version is actually what you're using, and if it's not there, it will complain. ASDF will complain. Now, let's take, for example, the version of Alexander that I'm using right now is pretty new, but if I needed to know the version that I currently have installed, I can certainly go to Quicklisp, this software, this Quicklisp software, Alexandria, and go into the main thing here. Figure out what version of Alexandria is actually available, and use this guide directly to always download this particular version. And my question is, and I haven't actually tried this, folks, so this is going to be news for me. If you try to load this via Quicklist, it should always download that version. Is that correct? Has anybody has anyone seen this?
As far as I know, Quicklist on its own does not have support for that yet. I mean, you could do some work to make sure that you're downloading a particular version. There are ways to do that, but in the default configuration, I believe Quicklisp always downloads the latest version of a library.
Yes, it only works off of the latest Quicklisp dist, which is a collection of all the libraries for the month. You do happen to have older versions of those software installed in your cache, in your Quicklisp cache, but I mean, they're cleaned out. I forgot what functionality cleans them out, but it's automatically cleaned out over time, so you can't really rely on the version. And not only that, hardly anybody ever versions their software in Common Lisp, so it's kind of a pointless feature.
Okay. I mean, it becomes, I mean, if you're writing, I know from the standpoint of like server software, especially if you're writing stuff from like, say, the cloud, it doesn't really matter anyway, because of the fact that you can burn a Docker image and just run it, and you can have a centralized cache of all locally. You can have a centralized cache of all the current development libraries that you're using to develop the current version of the software that you're writing. But this is from a standpoint of reproducibility, where version numbers become particularly useful.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of that comes down to, as Michael said, that the most Common Lisp libraries don't provide versioning metadata.
Okay.
So it wouldn't actually be very useful as the ecosystem stands at the moment.
Gotcha.
And the other side of that is if you actually care about the specific version of the library that you're using, you probably don't want to be downloading from Quicklisp anyway, because Quicklisp in and of itself is basically purely to get the version of the library that works with the other software in Quicklist, right? Like the whole idea about Quicklist is whatever versions of the library you're downloading will compile without warnings with all of the other software in the current Quicklist dist, right? So
right. Like, so I guess what and this goes to a feature then that Zach actually brought up in one of his blog articles on Quicklist that I'm gonna a little touch base on, and that is the notion of being able to travel back in time to the particular Quicklist distribution that they're using. The only reason I brought up the version number is again, this is a new feature in ASDF that I saw when I was looking through some of the things that I wasn't sure if Quicklist ever leveraged. And I'm mentioning it to you folks because it is going to be, some people may use it, okay? And that that is something to at least take notice of, so you understand what that particular project is doing. So that way you don't go and say, oh, he wrote his system definition wrong. Clearly this is not going to compile. No, that's not the case. Especially if you're using a newer version.
But yeah, no, Quicklist on its own. Like, I guess probably the best way of describing it is making a slight distinction between the Quicklist client and the Quicklist official dist, right? Like, I think Michael already mentioned this, but a slight correction to your terminology. What you were describing as a dist is actually what Quicklist refers to actually as a release, a particular version of a piece of software that Quicklist has put together, compiled, and hosts on AWS as a release. Whereas the dist is actually the metadata for all of the is the metadata for a collection of software and where to get it, right? And a dist is what gets updated monthly, or the official Quicklist dist gets updated monthly with the metadata for all the projects that have been rebuilt and re-uploaded, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, like, what you can do, for example, is you can set up your own dist. You can actually create a dist. It's not terribly difficult. I've done it once or twice.
So you're jumping ahead. I'm actually going to be showing that. So.
Oh, okay. Right. Well, my point though, just so that when we get there, you're noticing this. Probably the best thing to do if you really care about versioning the individual libraries is you would probably want to have a particular a dist that hosts the versions of the libraries that you need, and then you would install that dist on any systems that you're going to be working with those particular versioned libraries. Because sort of the whole point of the Quicklist primary dist is to be internally consistent and very recent is the idea.
Right. Another point. I personally version my software. However, Quicklisp usually pulls from a branch on GitHub or some Git host and doesn't pull a particular version itself. So it automatically has master or automatically has, a Quicklisp release branch. They don't download versions unless you tell Zach specifically that you want to host this tarball or this zip or whatever.
Yeah, at any given moment.
Forget, so you're automatically going to get the latest commit.
Right. Yeah. The whole sort of idea is that is the Quicklist main dist, right? Is only tracking one version of the system.
And not only that, but every month you have no idea when that monthly dist is going to be created. So you don't know
true.
But that's also why I'm bringing it up, Michael. Right? Because we are talking about something that's constantly changing monthly. Monthly is still pretty fast when it comes to certain people's dev cycles. So, what is the correct way of creating a consistent environment every time is always going to be a question. And I think if I'm understanding Elijah correctly, and I'm understanding you, the best way is to create a private dist, which we will be touching base on, folks. Don't worry, we will be touching base on that. But the best way to at least making things consistent is to go ahead, download what you need to download, move it into a private dist that's for your consistent, for your specific release cycle, and then set up that dist and have each of your Lisp images use that dist to get all your libraries for that. Is that my understanding? Is that like...
Yeah, you could. There are a lot of different ways that you can do that. I mean, there's bundling and there's dists and that such. But yeah, the basic idea is that if you really care that much about having the specific version of the software, you want to, and perhaps it would be a good idea to make this easier. And in fact, some projects have been going along with the goal of making this easier, which we may get into eventually. To make it easier to pick out the specific libraries you want and have those locally selected. But yeah, you want to use some tool other than just Quicklisp on its own to make sure you're specifically grabbing the particular version of the library that you want.
Right.
Quicklist isn't for that. Or I guess the main Quicklist dist isn't for that.
So, I mean, that was that's very, very important to understand. Like, Quicklisp is a curated libraries. It's consistent in that it will work on the majority of lists that are available, have been displayed on the Quicklist website. Like, if there's a new Lisp that it's not on that list, you can certainly try and see that if it works or not, because it may just work out of the box. There are certain ways for you to get that list added to your to the list that's already been available. And honestly, the Lisp list that's available on the Quicklist website is very expansive and covers most of the major Lisps that are out there that are actually in active use, from ECL, embedded Common Lisp, all the way through Clasp, which is I mean, you can't go wrong with what's currently available there. But again, if there is something specific that you're using and it's not tested in there, some Lisp distribution that's available on Quicklist may work out of the box, others may not. And that, honestly, you would have to try and, test and even probably mention to Zach, hey, you need to probably add this to the test suite so that he could try and make those, very consistent. But that's one of the advantages of Quicklist because it tests on a lot of different Lisps. So the libraries are supposed to work. They're supposed to work on the Lisp that you're using that's in that list. So I'm just showing you SBCL, but I can easily do the same thing in Clojure Common Lisp, and it will be the same result. So you have, Quicklist. Let's go ahead and just show off one thing in Quicklist, and that is local projects. So when you install Quicklisp and you load up your stuff into SBCL, you may have noticed that in the Common Lisp that you're using, that it's all going into this location. What about projects that you're writing? What should you do to actually go in and have it automatically available in Quicklist? Well, if you look at the directory structure here that I'm displaying as I'm downloading PPCRE, there's this location called local projects. Quicklisp in its directory infrastructure has provided you a directory for you to add your own local development projects that's automatically available to you in your Lisp image when you load up your Lisp. This is actually pretty advantageous because now you can use a single notation for loading local or remote projects. Let's see how this works. So we have our Hello ASDF project. I'm going to show you two different situations. One just to show you that Quicklist can also deal with facils, and then the other one with source. So we have our if you look in our Common Lisp directory here, Common Lisp directory here, our Hello ASDF project with all the facils that are related to it. Let me go ahead and move this guy to, hold on one second. Okay, so let me go ahead and move this directory and pretend I've installed it in local projects. All right, this is actually kind of useful also if you find like a Lisp, and we're going to be touching base on this on like a particular Lisp project that isn't available in Quicklist, and there is one that we'll be demonstrating today, and that is Quicktist, and another one called Informatico that Quicktist actually depends on. You can actually clone those projects directly into local projects, and they'll be available in your Quicklisp installation. So to show this, I've moved my Hello ASDF project into local projects. Let me go ahead and now try using quick load to actually load this guy. You'll see that it actually loaded it correctly. Let's see if we can actually run our simple hello program, and it goes ahead and shows it. So now you can see that it actually can load facil files. It will also load source. So let's go ahead and let me remove this guy, and let's go and untar source code. So now we have the source code here instead. And when we try to load Hello ASDF here, you now see that the only difference between what was loaded before and what was loaded now is the fact that it compiled my code, and it compiled each package before it says that it's been loaded into the image. So there's an extra step, but you could certainly load facils if you need to. Again, going back to our earlier discussion, I discourage that. But now, every time you load Quicklist, like let's say we quit, and you don't like clear out your cache because there is a Lisp cache that keeps all the facil files that Quicklisp has compiled already. The next time you try and load this guy, as long as no source code has changed, it will just go ahead and load the facils directly into your Lisp image as if nothing has changed, and it'll still be available there. So that's great. You can actually develop stuff into your local projects directory. You can load it using Quicklisp. You can go ahead and tar these up and give it to other people. As long as they have a Quicklisp installation, they could put it into their local projects directory, and they could use your code as is. I mean, that's a pretty sneakernet way of actually distributing your software, right? But obviously, can we do better? This is where the notion of dist comes in. You could think of a dist like it's literally just a repository of a collection of libraries that that you can serve to other people. Now, dists are pretty complex, and up until probably 2012, you weren't able to. There wasn't any clear documentation on how to make your own dists. But then there was a project that came out around 2012 that's still fairly actively used called Quickdist that essentially solves this problem. It actually adds the metadata that's necessary for you to set up a repository, serve it, and it will do it in a fairly automated way. But there's a couple of prerequisite steps that one has to do in order to actually use it. And we will go through those now. The first thing is of course, you want to have your Quicklist set up here. And in your local projects directory, you're going to have to clone from the GitHub, and I will of course have this in my the Atlanta Functional Programming GitHub repository has a document. So those of you who are watching this, you don't have to worry about copying this URL down. But you need to first clone 2 projects in order for this to actually be used. All right. The first one is obviously the parent project, Quickdist. And Quickdist also leverages another project called Informatigo by a well-known Lisper by the name of Pascal Bourgounian. I cannot pronounce his last name. I apologize, Pascal, if you're watching this. But this project is a set of utilities that essentially Quickdist uses for certain reader macros in its development. So you need to go ahead and in your local projects directory again, clone Informatigo as well. All right. So now, let's take, for the sake of example, let's go ahead and also set up our Common Lisp repository here with our source code that we for our hello ASDF file. Okay, so now we have 2 directories that we need to think about. Okay, one is our Common Lisp directory. This is what's called our projects directory. Okay, the projects directory is used by Quickdist to essentially figure out what projects we want to ultimately serve to individuals. All right. Of course, we need to also set up a directory for distribution, and that is, we're not going to just give you these one by one as directories, right, in the project. Instead, we want to actually tar them up and actually save them off somewhere at some point. So in Quicklisp world, that's called a distribution directory. I have a directory called Lisp Dists here. Let's go ahead and create a new dist here called Quicklist demo. Okay. Now, Quicklist demo is the name of the dist that we're going to eventually install. All right. And our Common Lisp directory is our projects directory. So now we're actually ready to actually do some distribution. All right. So let's go ahead and before I do anything, let me do one more thing, just so that this will go well. I'm going to go ahead and use my current Quicklisp local project to demo this. So folks, this is just for demo purposes when I'm demoing this. You just need to worry about Common Lisp, your projects directory, and your new distribution directory, which is Quicklist demo in this example. So now we're actually ready to distribute. So what do we need to do? So first we load up our Common Lisp. We load up Quicklist. And what Quicklist does is it will install FADO, Bordeaux threads. It also uses Alexandria. It leverages a couple of external libraries on top of Informatico to actually do some of the serialization. This will probably take a few minutes to actually set up. Again, like I said before, as long as you don't blow away your cache where the facils are located, you only need to do this once. I occasionally try to clean out my facil files, just because if there are certain libraries I no longer use, I don't want their facils to be lying around. I'd rather just compile them from source when I need them again. For security, it uses another project called Ironclad, but we won't touch it base here because that's a third party. That's a different long-term discussion on security and using Lisp security. While this is loading, does anyone have questions so far? Comments? Okay.
Ram, I have one quick question.
Yeah, sure.
When you modify Quicklist to automatically load, does that modify the image, or is that just they're just like a list somewhere of Lisp files that get loaded upon image creation, or does it actually modify the image itself?
Add to init file always loads a particular Lisp file, so that's consistent. It starts with a vanilla SBCL image, and then what Quicklisp does is it loads, and I can show this to you. It's in your, if you look in your Quicklist directory, it is this setup.list file. You see that setup.list file? That's what's loaded every time. If you look at what actually gets outputted, now this is based on, I'm using SBCL, each CCL setup file should have the same sort of S expressions, but I'm just showing you the RC file that's generated when I use QL add to init file. This is what's actually generated. It basically figures out where setup.lisp is located, and then it checks to see if the file still exists. And if it does, it'll go ahead and load it. This is so that if you decide to blow away your Quicklisp directory and you're still using Lisp, it doesn't complain. But this file will try to see if it exists and then load it up.
Yeah, so a lot of Lisp implementations provide some kind of user init file. You can actually also specifically request SBCL, at least, or at least SBCL, you want to know the option for by heart. -- no user init if you don't want SBCL to load the user init file, which I do when I'm writing build scripts. Because I don't actually want Quicklisp, for example, included in my image that I'm dumping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you just run SBCL and then you load your program or load your system and then you dump an image or you use program op or whatever, that dumped image will include a copy of Quicklist because you told SBCL that every time it starts it should load Quicklist. So -- no user init make sure that SBCL doesn't do that, which is nice because there's really no reason for you to be bundling Quicklist with every single program you create. It doesn't really help anybody, and it increases the size of your image and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
It's worth noting too that as they mentioned, every implementation has its own init file. That's not the case if you're using Roswell. It's a single file for all implementations, so you have to use conditional macros for that.
Oh yeah, that's a fair point.
I would not recommend using Roswell. It's littered with bugs. It gets me every time I use it. It's very catered to newbies and people who want to script Common Lisp, but it just causes so many problems. I do not recommend it for newbies.
I try to recommend it only in one situation where I consider the Roswell like the build system. Like if you don't want to write a separate script to actually go through and set up your environment and then write SBCL -- eval, load all these libraries before you load up the system definition so that it can compile my code. I was just you can use Roswell to do a Ros build on a ROS file that quick loads everything and then generates what it needs to generate. At least I would think that that's more convenient from a newbie standpoint. Of course, it can. I think to Elijah's point, not having Quicklist in the final image is certainly a bonus to doing it by hand.
And it's actually really not that difficult to do it by hand either, because you can pretty easily ask Quicklisp to generate a standalone copy of every single system depended on by a given ASD file, and it'll just take the source code for all those things, dump them in a directory that you specify, and then dump out. It'll include in there a little file that you can load that will add all of those systems to the ASDF load path. And so what I generally do is I ask it to just create that bundle for me. In the directory of my project, and then to build, I just have load that file, and then ASDF load my system, and then SBCL ext save Lisp and die, and it's not the most trivial thing, but it's only a couple of lines, and I can pretty quickly customize it for whatever project I need.
So, would you mind in a separate discussion, Elijah, to show us some of your sample things for that? Because I think
sure. Definitely.
I think that would be very useful because it will be it'll help certain people at least get out like a certain skeleton. Of course, you guys can build off of it, but it'll be useful to go through.
Sure.
So we now have Quickdist loaded, and now Quickdist really is pretty simple. It's not rocket science. It's just one simple command. It's one simple function where you name your repository, your dist, right? You name the base URL that you're going to be using, okay? And I'm just going to go ahead and leverage localhost 4242 for the time being. Certainly you can do like, 0.0.0 whatever to actually make it more expansive, but for demo's sake, I'm going to go ahead and specify it like this. Then you have your projects directory, which we talked before. This is, our Common Lisp directory, okay? This is where all the projects that you want to host will be located. Our final directory is of course the dist directory. Where are they actually? The destination of where all the disks are going to be actually finally located. All right, and this distr is what I showed earlier. It's our Quicklist demo directory that I created earlier. All this does is it will generate. Skip that project. That's a TGZ. Don't need to worry about that one. And I may have messed up one thing here. It was... Oh, right. I'm an idiot. Sorry, demo fail, guys. Before you start processing, there's one extra step that you actually need to do, all right? And this is especially important for those of you who are using Quicklist on a non-Linux platform. Being very upfront about this. On a non-Linux platform, you need to do this. You need to specify the location of GNU-tar, because there are very specific flags in Quicklist project that actually requires GNU-tar, and I, for the life of me, don't know what the equivalents are to actually go and fix this. So in order to do that, it's pretty simple. There is a global variable called star GNU-tar in the Quicklist namespace that now I have to go and remember where my GNU-tar is. GNU-tar is local bin. Okay. That you need to specify and replace. Once you do that, now if you run this, what it does is it goes through your project directory, and for each project in that project directory, it processes it, and what that means is it first generates a tar file, okay? After it creates the top level directories, which in Quicklist demo is Quicklist demo. Then it specifies today's date, and it specifies an archive directory for where all the tar files are actually going to be generated. So when we quit this, let's go look at this first. So let's look at what was generated by Quicklist. Quicklist demo. You have our Quicklist demo.txt. This guy basically is all the metadata related to your particular distribution. Okay, where the disk info subscription is located, where the release index is located. The release index is really just like a database, and I'll just show it to you. And what systems are actually available on this. And this system.txt actually lists out what dependencies are used. So let's look at what is actually inside the current distribution. This again is just a copy of the Quicklist demo txt. So if other people are using the install disk client, it will download this guy and install it. It doesn't install the top level one. It actually goes into this directory, which is the current release, to install it. The releases is nothing more than what project is available, where do you get it, and what ASD to load. And if you actually look at the systems directory, this guy is nothing more than what it did is it went into the system definition. It figured out what other projects this project depends on, and it will load them up accordingly. So in this case, you will see that Hello ASDF is dependent upon itself, and it's dependent upon Alexandria. So this is kind of nice. So for each project, you can think of this as a text file database that you could go through and actually see what its dependencies are if you wanted to. These databases are what are loaded up into the server and what's hosted to anybody who actually installs this disk. So how do we go ahead and install this disk? Well, first we have to go in and go in and start up a server that will host it. So for this, I'm going to just go ahead and use what was used in the Quicklist documentation, which is Hunt and Toot. There are other ways of actually doing this with other ones. I just don't want to take the time right now to show you guys all the different web servers that are available for Common Lisp. I think the two practice active ones are actually Hunch and Toot, and I think Clack actually uses Hunch and Toot underneath, but I'm not sure.
Clack is actually a framework for it's a server agnostic framework. You can write your application in Clack and change it to anything without changing any code.
Oh, okay. So
that's pretty much why it's favored these days. I would not use Hunch and Toot only because if you wanted something fast, like Woo is another web server that's purely FFI syscalls, a Lisp wrapper over syscalls. It's extremely fast, and you can change it to that for production with 0 code changes, just a symbol.
Well, when we start talking about web development, we will revisit that because that is something that I wanna take the time in this study group to at least really bring up and talk about what's available for speed of development and startup time, which is something that because I'm interested in serverless architecture, so it's something that I would like to know more about in Common Lisp, and that's uncharted territory for me.
Just odd little side thing.
Yeah, sure.
I would probably not use a Lisp web server for this specific thing at all. I'd probably use Python's simple HTTP server because it's specifically designed to host a directory on the spot. Personally, because it's just Python-m simple HTTP server, and it just hosts the directory.
Is that all you need to do though for it? We can try that. Hold on, let's go ahead and try that because this is.
If all you're doing is hosting the directory, and I think I looked at the docs, and that was all it looked like you were doing with Hunch and Toot was hosting the directory. Well, you can do that,
Let's go ahead and do that. Let's see. Okay, so let's do this, which is Python-m. Well, I think I can. No, hold on.
Yeah, you cd into the directory you want to host,
right.
And then you do Python-m, and then
Python 3-m http.server. Let me see this. Okay, so now this is running in 8000. Let's go ahead and open up another session here. So now, if all goes well, we're running this, and actually, if that's the case, I'm going to have to regenerate my, I'm going to have to regenerate that thing because the metadata is wrong now. Let's go ahead and do that. Give me a second. Sorry, folks, you're seeing real-time edits. But that's how we work here in the Common Lisp study group. So let's go ahead and do a quick load of Quicklist again, which will take just 2 seconds. Now that everything's compiled, and we do Quickdist. Oh wait, since I blew away this, I have to do Quickdist :*GNU-tar. It's going to be located here. tar. Okay, Quickdist. Name is this guy. What is it? Base URL? Yeah, base URL. Base URL is going to be localhost 8000. Projects, there is Common Lisp. This there is Quicklisp/Quickdist-demo. Okay. So now, as to Elijah's suggestion, all I need to do is just go into lispdist. Sorry. Where am I? Okay. Go into Quickdist-demo, and then I can just do this. Okay. So now, how do we go in? So first we need to go and install the dist. And to install the dist, we use Quicklist provides this utility called QL-dist. It's a namespace actually that's loaded as part of Quicklist called QL-dist. And there are plenty of functions in this namespace, but the particular function that we will be using is install dist. This guy takes in a URL, which is localhost 8000, and we want to actually specify the metadata tag file that we need to install, and it will go ahead, download it, and install it. And now what it did is it recognized that there are multiple like URLs that it needs to go and download because that text file actually dictates those, and it went ahead and installed releases and systems. And what you can see is now is if you use system like apropos to go and search for packages, and let's say we search for our hello ASDF package, you'll see that the hello ASDF package gets returned. And let me go ahead and see if I can actually maximize this a little bit more. Notice in the metadata that's been provided outside of what date was built and the name of the package here, this last one here, this actually tells you what dist it's actually coming from and what day this dist was actually built. So when you go in and install it, let's say we do a QL quick load, it'll go ahead and download it and recompile it and then install it onto your system. So you can see very quickly, this is very easy, right? This is very simple. You could just, generate using Quicklist your entire distribution, use Python or whatever, load it on a server, and then, have a single point that has all your system libraries available to anybody, any like slave, build slaves. If you want to build pipelines in Travis, it will be available to you or whatever. As we were talking about earlier, I think Elijah is right. Because the way Quicklist was designed based on this notion that the dist is a single point in time of consistency for all libraries that are available in the dist. If you're building something where you need to pay attention to what versions you have, this is certainly probably the best way of doing it. Go ahead and use Quicklist to go and create this distribution folder for you that has everything that's related to what you need to build your software in, and then host that on a web server somewhere so that people can use to download it. Install your dist, and then you can just go ahead and run your build systems as such. It'll get everything from that server, and it won't actually get interfered. Now, if there is one thing that you want to know is obviously, well, what if I want to go at some point in time and uninstall this guy? Well, Quicklist gives you that ability too. So it has a function called find dist that if you use to look up, it'll tell you what dist demo it is, and then you can certainly just do ql-dist uninstall dist, and you can do this in one command, but I'm showing it to you in two. And you can certainly uninstall that dist. Was it uninstall dist? Okay, I must have messed. 1 second. I must have messed up the actual command. Give me 1 second. Oh, it's QL dist. I was thinking of something else. QL dist uninstall. QL dist find dist. And now it no longer is available, and you can certainly see that when you do apropos on any project that was being hosted by that private dist. You'll see that nothing gets returned. So that dist server it's still hosting the stuff, but it's no longer available for us. It's not in our index of distributions that we could search from. Any questions? Cool. That's it for what I have. Honestly, I think this is. I've showed you now, that you can create libraries pretty easily. You can create system definitions, fairly simple. ASDF gives you an utility to build on those. Once you have a centralized source registry, we've used Quicklist to actually go in and load them pretty conveniently. A nice syntax to go and download dependencies, especially. And we've now used Quicklist to go in and create private repositories, so that if we want some consistency, we could certainly do so. So really, the tool set that I recommend, at least, is Quick Project, obviously, to generate the template that sort of maps out how Quicklist expects its projects to be sort of like structured, and it gives you all the metadata associated with that. I use Quicklist, obviously, for loading and storing stuff. ASDF is the build tool for things that we can. Once you have the system definition file defined, you can use ASDF operate and all the different operations that we talked about, from program op to image op, or even compile bundle op to create Vassals executable programs, or images if you want to distribute that way. And we've used Quicklist to go in and create private repository servers, so that you can also host these yourself, rather than also depending on like Zach to put them in the Quicklist central repository, because that requires a little bit more testing. Once, obviously, your project has been tested on multiple Lisps, and it's a good subset of Quicklisp, and it's an open source project especially, I do recommend you try and tell Zach about it, so that it does get installed on the central repository, because then it's available to everybody. Otherwise, you are going to have to notify any third-party users that are not aware of your private repository, where your dist is located, so that they can install it, and then search for those third-party libraries from there. So that's sort of where the build system discussion will come to an end for this week. Are there any final questions? Any comments about what I've mentioned?
I just wanted to mention that if you do plan to release software on the official Quicklist dist,
yes,
there is a few rules that must be followed in order to get your software accepted.
Okay.
Number one, the license has to be allowed for distribution, obviously. 2, it has to work on SBCL and at least one other Common Lisp implementation. 3, it has to be able to build with ASDF, obviously. And there's another one, but I forgot. There is an article about it, though. It's right in the Quicklist fact. I think it's the first fact item, actually. And it links to an article on how to get your software listed.
I actually was trying to look up that.
And actually, there is one other little thing, which is it's not just that your library has to build on at least SBCL and one other Lisp. It's that it has to build without warnings, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that's because Quicklist promotes warnings as errors. And I forgot to mention, it has to build on SBCL on Linux 64.
Right, yeah.
That's where Zach tests everything on.
Yeah.
But yeah, Quicklist promotes all warnings to errors. So if you don't promote errors, there is a flag to do it. If you don't promote your warnings to errors, you can actually get your software dropped from Quicklist if Zach doesn't let you know about it.
Yeah. He is pretty good about that, though. He'll try to get in touch with you if you put up a version of the software that builds with warnings. He'll bug you a couple times.
I just had to turn that flag on last month because he hunted me down because you don't see these errors unless you enable warnings or errors. So, I mean, it was perfectly fine to me, but it was not fine to Zach.
Right. Well, because the other side of it is that Quicklist actually muffles warnings and errors when you're doing the final load, doesn't it? When you have a project loaded in local projects, if you QL quick load that, it'll actually muffle warnings.
It muffles everything. Yep.
Yeah, it muffles warnings unless it's an error.
It accepts the verbose flag if you want to enable.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Or output.
But otherwise, it muffles everything. And so you really do want, anything that's actually in the Quicklist dist to be warning and errorless entirely, because otherwise that muffling doesn't really make any sense.
Interesting.
But yeah. Anyway.
Interesting. So you're saying that warnings in Common Lisp, I mean, in other compiled languages like C and C++, right? This is kind of new. I thought warnings in Common Lisp are just warnings. They're not going to be.
Oh, they are. They're hard Lisp. They usually suggest that there might be a runtime error that could occur.
Okay.
That's why Zach promotes all warnings and considers them errors.
Well, I'm actually kind of
curating the dist for Quicklist.
Yeah, there is one other thing there, is the distinction between warnings and style warnings. I don't think Zach promotes style warnings. I could be wrong about that.
I think he does.
Okay, well that's a different thing altogether. But the thing is that there is a slight difference between warnings and style warnings. Like not using a variable, for example. Like having a variable you don't use is a style warning. In my experience, I'm pretty sure. Redefining a function. There's a good example. Redefining a function is a style warning, right? Because if you do redefine a function in a file, right? If you define a function twice, that's something you want to be notified about. But if you're at the REPL and you redefine a function, that's not actually a cause for worry. But there's no obvious way for the REPL to know the difference.
What type of warning is the warning that SBCL emits when you create a method without a generic function? Well, actually, it doesn't do that anymore. But in the past,
that was a style warning. I'm pretty sure that was.
Yeah, it probably doesn't promote them as errors because that's
Well, the reason I ask is because since Quicklist does, it muffles warning. It muffles all output unless there's an error. Like if there's an error, a flat out error, it will actually go into a debugger. And I don't remember it ever taking, because you said promoting warning to errors. I don't remember it ever taking a warning and making it into an error and dropping me to a debugger.
What he means is when Zach is running his test build.
Okay, gotcha.
The test build, it considers warnings as errors. I.e., if there's an error, if there's a warning emitted during the test build for building the dist, it completely drops that system altogether. It's like doesn't accept it. But yeah,
and there is a flag that you can add to your SBCLRC or whatnot to enable Quicklist that promotion of errors.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'd like to. We will touch base on that after.
Well, the thing is,
I'm curious about that.
Promoting, what's normally considered a warning in Common Lisp probably would be better considered an error in a statically compiled language. Like what you generally call a warning in Common Lisp is something like referencing a function before it's defined.
Right.
Right. The whole point being, a warning means something is broken, but there's a good chance you'll be able to fix it by tweaking some other part of the program, right? And so it's not going to stop you from compiling this thing in because you could fix it somewhere else. Whereas an error is, this code can't work no matter what you do elsewhere.
Right.
Whereas a style warning is you've done something that you probably want to be notified about if you didn't intend to do that, but otherwise isn't technically an issue.
Right.
Like,
it makes sense because it has a little bit more flexibility there, unless it's a direct violation of types, for example. Like if you're trying to
Well, actually, in a lot of cases, if you're violating types locally, sure, right? But like if you pass like the wrong number of arguments to a function, right? That's a warning. It's not an error because you could redefine that function to then take that new number of arguments.
Right, that's correct. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, that makes sense.
Warnings are places where if the code would never change in the future, that would be an error. But because the code elsewhere could change, it's possible that this definition is in fact the correct one. This code was in fact doing the right thing, and it's the other code that's wrong. In trying to keep live coding easy and fast and simple, a lot of things that would normally just be flat out rejected by static systems are accepted as warnings in Common Lisp.
I mean, that's a very good point. Because we have that flexibility, it makes things a little bit more crazier.
Right.
But it goes back to though my question about the only reason I even brought it up is because of muffled warnings that are promoted as errors. I was like, well, if it's muffled, right, and it's an error, I know for a fact it'll still drop into a debugger, and I've never seen that, which is why I asked about it. So
the issue here is the Quicklisp for users, it muffles all warnings.
Yeah.
But then for Zach, it treats warnings as errors.
Gotcha.
So you don't see nothing, and Zach sees a big fat red error.
Well, I'm curious to be consistent if there's something
Unless
I can
you use the
set up.
verbose flag, then you can see your warnings.
Oh, excellent.
Or you enable the, I forgot exactly what it's called, but there is a flag in Quicklisp internals to turn this on to promote all warnings as errors.
Sweet. Well, folks, I mean, this is the nice build story for you inside Common Lisp. At least standard practice that is being used now. Obviously, things can change over time as more and more people use it. But if you're joining us today and you're watching this, Quicklist, Quickdist, as knowing some fundamental understanding of ASDF for your projects, and for project generation, using Quick Project honestly will get you pretty far. And those are my recommendations to set up your project structure and build system. There are other things that you can also do, like one that I was going to mention only in passing right now. We will hopefully get a more detailed discussion on is use of continuous integration to test on multiple Lisps. I've been looking at Travis CI because there seems to be quite a bit of material on doing Lisp testing with it. Once I have more of an idea on how to set that up, I will certainly convey it to the rest of you. Anybody who has that idea and knows how to do it, please ping me because I would love to have you on so that I don't, so you can give a more of a detailed discussion. Again, before we sign off, I just want to mention a couple of things. If you're following me on Twitter, my name is Unix Nerd. Feel free to tweet comments about this and send me feedback. If you're on either Discord or on Slack, my handle is Bugram. Feel free to go ahead and that's spelled like that. Feel free to DM me on what any questions, any feedback that you may have, and any suggestions for future talks. Any other comments from other folks on this? I think Travis is probably a good point to at least touch base on the continuous integration story, but I don't know what your guys' thoughts were on that.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like something we should touch base on. I did want to note one thing. You mentioned earlier me talking about the build setup that I've used for a couple of my projects in the past.
Do you have something that you could show us?
I mean, yeah, actually, if you want to look at that right now.
Give me just 1 second,
okay.
and we'll go through it.
Okay.
Let me just switch windows here. It's all yours.
Okay. Let me share my screen. There we are. Let's not do recursion today. So, basically, can I hide that? Still can't hide that. They still haven't fixed that stupid thing.
Hold on, let me go back to this guy and stop presenting. Right.
So, the basic idea is, Quicklist has this operation. Let me increase my font size. Everybody see that?
I can.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I can.
So Quicklist has this operation called bundle systems, right? And basically what it does is you give it a list of system names, a output directory, and whether or not to overwrite the bundle it's created there, right? And it'll go through each of those systems, right, that you've listed, and any of their recursive dependencies. And it'll pull them all out of the Quicklist machinery that you've got, and it'll unpack their archives into this bundle directory, right? And so what you can do is you can, give your dependencies, or you can even just give your system there, which is what I generally do. I'll just give my top level system, and the reason for that is that bundle systems actually silently ignores things that aren't part of a Quicklist disk, like things that Quicklist doesn't have an archive for, because it's basically just for getting stuff out of Quicklist. And so what you can do is you can actually just give the ASD file of your top level program of your system, right? And it'll go through all of its dependencies and all of their dependencies and all of their dependencies. And it will create, where am I? Why am I not where I want to be? That's weird. Huh. Here we are. It'll create, for mine, no, I'm still not where I thought I was. Why am I never where I think I am?
It happens. Trust me.
Dropbox, project share, bundle libs, right? So it creates this directory, which is a bundle, right? And it actually has the software folder like a Quicklist disk does. And it also actually has a local projects where you can actually put any other projects you want included in the bundle, and it'll actually recursively process that entire local projects folder for any ASD files and add them. And basically what it is you have this file here called bundle.lisp, right? And really what you do is if you load that file, any software that's part of the bundle here or in the local projects, all of the ASD files for that software is immediately added to the ASDF registry. And actually it's added at the front of the ASDF registry, so it overrides any other references to those systems that are already available. Right, and so what you can then do is I have this build file here, right? And I've got, a lot of this stuff is just telling SBCL not to yell at me about stuff because I'm doing other builds that will yell at me about stuff. And so my final build here, I'm like, just ignore all of it. So I tell SBCL to muffle stuff. I actually go through the traditional way of muffling stuff. I bind a lot of these variables to muffle stuff. But the really core thing here is these two lines, right? I load bundlelib/bundle.lisp, and then I load the ASD file of my project. I ought to be using ASDF load ASD for that, but I wasn't aware of that when I wrote this particular little build script. So,
You mean, wait, what's the difference with load ASD versus load system?
Load ASD just parses the ASD file and registers that as a loadable system, right? An ASD file can define multiple systems, right? And loading the ASD file doesn't actually load those systems. You then have to run an ASDF load system in order to actually load one of the systems there, right? If I don't have this load ASD here, ASDF doesn't know to search the current directory, and I'm not going to bother mucking with the central registry just to make it search in the current directory.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just explicitly loading that one ASD file so that any of the systems defined in it can be loaded when I do the load system down here.
Okay, so you're saying that ASD it just parses and creates a directory structure that uses later on when you
no, because it's just I have
because I didn't see that in the documentation, which is why I'm asking.
So if if I were doing this in a directory like local projects or in my Common Lisp directory, places where any ASD files would already be on the load path, I wouldn't need to do that.
Okay, gotcha.
But I'm not doing that in one of the directories that's known by my system. I'm doing this in a directory that's synchronized by Dropbox with a few other people I was working on this particular project with because, stuff. And I didn't want to change my central registry configuration to make that work, so instead I was using...
Totally understandable. I'm just only asking primarily from the standpoint that I haven't seen this in the documentation, so it's unknown to me. So
if you have an ASD file that isn't on the load path already, really what you ought to do is ASDF load ASD.
Okay. Thank you.
And what that'll do is it'll do the exact same thing as if you'd ask to load a system like AI-project1, right? ASDF will go and it'll search the central registry for an ASD file named AI-project1.asd, and it'll do a load ASD on that. And then it will look at any of the systems that were added after doing that load ASD to see if any of them match the name AI-project1. That's really what's going on internally when you ask it to load a system. It first uses the name to figure out what the name of the ASD file that probably defines that system is, and then it does a load ASD on that file, and then that defines the system, and then now that it has the system defined, it can go and, actually load the system itself.
Okay.
So here, really loading the bundle right there makes it so that all of the systems are available. They're added to the registry so that when I try to load them as dependencies of AI-project1, it knows where to find them. And then I can load ASD here, and then I can actually load the system itself. I can actually load the system itself there. And then I disable the debugger, and then I just do a save Lisp and die. Make it, give the name of the file, mark it executable, mark the top level, and I give compression because I just like having 50 megabyte binaries.
That's beautiful. I mean, the fact that you're using a very that's high compression, right? Number 5.
It goes from 1 to 9.
Okay, gotcha. The other question I have is this is making a release executable by doing disable debugger?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is a release. This is not meant to be used for testing or anything like that.
Gotcha.
If I were planning for that, I would not have disabled the debugger.
Okay. All right.
But no, I almost always disable the debugger on my release executables because there's really no point giving somebody a program that when it breaks, it drops them into the SBCL debugger because unless they're a Lisper, they'll have no clue what to do with it, and they'll have to go to extra effort to figure out how to close it.
Right?
And so, I'd much prefer, if an error occurs, just print out some messages to screen and then just exit.
Right. Absolutely. Makes sense.
And so I always SBX disable debugger when I'm doing final builds. And so, yeah, this is really the whole script. And so, really, I do QL bundle systems, right? And I just say, AI project 1, right? I give my system, and then I give the directory, which was bundle libs here, and I'm not going to regenerate that, right now because it takes forever because I depended on a whole lot of stuff for this particular project. But it would basically be like this, right? I would say bundle systems, and I give my top level system, since it's not in Quicklist, and so Quicklist won't add it to the bundle anyway. So I can just give it my system, and it'll just take all the dependencies of my system and all of their dependencies and all their dependencies, and any of the ones that are in Quicklist, it'll go ahead and dump those into that bundle. And then I can just load the bundle.lisp file in my build script, and any other systems I load that depend on those the systems in the bundle can be found by ASDF now. And that way, when I run this, I run this. I might have created an actual script for this. I might not have. No, to execute this, I would just do SBCL -- no user init -- load build.lisp, right? And I just do that, and it'll do the whole thing. It'll go through the entire process.
It will go through the entire process of loading up the bundle, like the way you call bundle systems, and then calling up that
No,
script? Okay.
no. Well, it won't call the bundle systems because that requires Quicklist being loaded, right? If I load build.list, that's just this step over here,
Okay.
right?
So okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, so but I think that's interesting. That means technically you could make a make file that essentially,
Yeah.
and I mean a real like GNU make file that will. So if you want to do a debug, you can have a debug build that essentially calls up this debug build.lisp that essentially does the same thing with bundle.
And actually, I could have the disable debugger thingy happen actually as a flag pass to SBCL even.
Okay.
Because SBCL, I think it is actually say disable debugger. I think it is actually that. See if it'll. Yeah, that's a flag. Error foo. Yeah, unhandled condition in disable debugger mode.
Gotcha. Nice. So it just crashes out.
I could actually just have a make file, that passes the disable debugger flag, in there, definitely.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, nice.
And so really the bundle step was really to make sure, it was actually for reproducibility reasons.
No, that's why I'm bringing it up, because if you want to do it reproducible, you can have a single script that does it, that first generates it always. It always, like, if let's say that you change your ASD, but you haven't called bundle system at all, again, previously, you can now just call bundle systems. It'll look at your ASD, load everything, put it into bundle libs, and then you can do your build as the same, always, and you're always guaranteed reproducibility, because it's going back to the ASD, as it should, to recognize what has changed from the last time, right?
Right. Well, that has a slight danger, which is, and then there's no real way around this unless we get into things like QLOT or messiness involving actually tracking the specific version that you're pulling down from Quicklisp. Because otherwise, this still suffers from the problem that it's pulling the latest version from Quicklist, right? It's doing that when I build the bundle instead of when I build the project, which means what I can do is I can build my bundle ahead of time, right? If I know what libraries I need, I can build the bundle ahead of time, and then I can I have that pre-compiled, cached, etc., and then I can run builds against that bundle, right?
So,
and
I'm just going to interject here and just say this.
Sure.
Based on our discussion earlier about Quickdist and the notion of private repositories, I think, like, from a professional, like, project standpoint, if I'm working with a team, I would set ahead of time, okay, we're using Quicklist, this dist. I'll pre-download everything, set up a private repository for everyone prior to actually, and then have them install it. So that way they're always...
definitely could. It depends. Oftentimes I haven't found it to be strictly necessary, but you definitely could do that. Like, and there are cases I'm sure where it would definitely make sense, just to decide on your versions. Part of the issue with doing that is it only really makes sense if you're building, I guess I should say, final software, like not libraries.
Right. Exactly. And I'm only thinking about applications from this standpoint.
Right.
I'm not thinking about libraries. I'm thinking about just applications.
If you're building an application, and actually that's basically why I did this, right? Because my bundle here is actually inside my Dropbox shared directory,
right?
Which meant that my teammates actually were also working against the bundle, which meant that we knew that we were using the same versions of all of our dependencies.
Right. Okay. And this is why. So this makes this thing consistent, right? By creating, by using the final the bundling for me then will just become a secondary step in the private repo case, right? You're bundling it just so that you could build out the release rather than having Quicklist loaded to load everything and then somehow removing it later on. Now you just bundled everything together. So your build script has everything already available to it, so it can
exactly. Like really, what bundle does is all really bundle does is it goes through and re-extracts all of those things,
right?
All of that software, and of course, bundle also does have a local projects directory, so you can actually clone in whatever specific versions of things you need. So if I really did care about a particular version of some software, I could clone it into the local projects of the bundle, and then it would be available. Really, the whole point of that is just I wanted specifically for the project to have some way of distancing myself at least by one step from using Quicklist to get the dependencies. I'm obviously having to use Quicklist to get the bundle, but once I have the bundle, I'm working against the bundle.
Right.
And it means I'm at least one step removed from odd things breaking. Because Quicklisp updates.
Right, and you're guaranteeing your environment is consistent, which means at any later
Right.
time you can compress this guy so that if we're talking about version releases, right, you could
Sure.
say, okay, version 2.0, okay, I can grab the 2.0 bundle. I have all the dependencies that I used at the time that I built it. I don't have to think about grabbing
Could
it.
do that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, we went a little over, but this was a very good discussion. Thank you so much, Elijah, for showing us this thing, because I think this will help folks get consistent builds using existing tools that's already there. Like Quicklisp is already giving you this ability to do this. And yeah, cool. So next time, guys, I was hoping to go through Roswell, but apparently Michael says that Roswell is a little broken, so I'm going to have to go do some digging to see how broken it really is.
Cripplingly broken on Arch Linux for the last 3 months. I actually just switched completely over to Debian on one of my machines to get around it.
Yeah, I always use Debian. I've been using Debian for quite a while. I didn't know that Arch was broken. But Roswell was working. There is a bug, I will say, right now, and for those who are watching, who are actually part of the Roswell project committee, please try and fix this. There seems to be an issue if you specify loading up an image on a particular list where it just ignores loading up that image altogether. So, I was going to show how to actually load up the image that I made from last week through Roswell using that command line flag, but it didn't work. Like, the symbols never got loaded at all. So it's almost as if it's not loading up the core file. It's just, stopping short of something like that. Maybe it's not implemented in it, and they have a ghost flag there.
Yeah, just as a rule, I tend to avoid bothering with images just for libraries. I pretty much only ever use images to dump executables. Because,
So are you using ImageOp or you're using ProgramOp, right? I noticed that you're just doing straight up save Lisp and die, so...
Yeah, because when I do a build script, I'm doing a build script for a particular implementation, and so I don't worry so much about that. But I would probably, if I were worrying about something more general, I would definitely be using ProgramOp.
Okay, gotcha.
I don't tend to bother with making images, because an image is necessarily tied to a particular version of a particular implementation. There's no real way around that.
Yeah.
And so I find distributing images to be about as silly as distributing facils.
There you have it, folks.
Distributing programs, definitely, but the only reason I ever would dump an image is if I have one thing that I've been considering, but I've never bothered to put the effort into actually doing, is dumping a core containing Quicklist and 3 or 4 other libraries that I just have my user in it loading by default right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because it would be nice not to wait the 1 second or 2 that it takes for my image, for Slime to load all those libraries every time it starts. But as I said, it's a second or 2, and that means that anytime any of those libraries updates, I have to regenerate that image, and so I don't really use images for anything.
Okay. Well, join us next time. I think we've gone through a fairly decent detail about the build system. I think we'll touch base on loop finally, because the loop macro is our final chapter in Practical Common Lisp that we sort of I didn't want to touch base because it's a pretty long discussion, and there's just a lot of stuff on libraries related to packages I want to touch base on first. But we're now back in full swing into this final issue, this final joyous journey in the loop language, the mini sub-language that's available to you for iteration. Time permitting, then I'm just going to mention that we may also touch base on iterate too, if we have enough time. But until next time, this is Ram Vedam signing off. Thanks so much to Elijah and Michael Fiano for providing some nice feedback on today's discussion, and I hope to see you guys next time.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Ram.